to a brief introduction on pathogens. A pathogen is a disease-causing organism, and they come in a couple of different categories. So we're going to look at them, and we're going to go to some different resources this time. So the first thing is a microbiology book, and we're going to look at different types of microorganisms. So when we look at a frog's egg, which I'm sure most of you have never looked at, you have no idea what the size of it is, but it's a lot smaller than a chicken egg. When we look at a grain of pollen, we are now done into the level of what's called a micrometer and 100 micrometers. So if you have a millimeter, let's go back. If we have a meter, divide it 1,000 times, you get a millimeter. Divide it 1,000 times again, you get a micrometer. And divide it 1,000 times again, and we're down to the nanometers. So when we look at different microorganisms, most of them are pretty much just below or at the level of the light microscope. So we can see bacteria, but they just look like little dots. You can't see most viruses with a light microscope, but you can see bacteria. So when we go to the level of bacteria, they're quite small, and they're at the 1 micrometer length. So most microorganisms are small, hence the word microorganisms. Now, the first one we're going to look at, first off, just so you know, if you have not yet opened up this page, please use this page for notes, because it is, you take notes on these pages so you can walk through it. And also, so you also have access to the resources I'm looking at. And you may have to stop this video halfway through to fill it in. Good. So this is different microorganisms. Now, when we're looking at pathogens, they're the microorganisms that cause disease. And we're going to look at bacteria, viruses, then we're going to look at protozoans and also fungi in different categories. So that's what we're going to look at. The first category we're going to look at is bacteria. Now, bacteria under a light microscope look like little circles, rods, which are called bacilli, and they're basically named on their shapes. So you've got cocci, bacilli, and spirilla. That is something you'll probably look at a higher bacteria level. What I want you to realize is bacteria are found in almost every habitat of the earth. They're very common and very hardy, so can grow in most places. Now, only about 20% of them are disease-causing. Most bacteria are good, and you actually have bacteria in your gut, which is good. So often, only a few of them are disease-causing. The first organism we're going to look at is bacteria. Now, this is what's called a rod-shaped or bacillus bacteria. So not all bacteria have these parts, but we'll start with this one. So to begin with, the thing that's unique to most bacteria is the outer covering. Bacteria have a capsule, which is protective, and then a cell wall. And it's a cell wall that makes bacteria very unique and also hard to penetrate. Antibiotics act on the formation of the cell wall. So if you can't make cell walls, you can't spread your bacteria. So in this situation, your bacteria has a cell wall. Inside is the plasma membrane, a little bit of cytoplasm, no specialized structures inside the cell wall. And those specialized structures are called ribosomes. And then some bacteria have a flagella or a tail on it to help it move. They're very simple, but they can reproduce on their own, and they reproduce on their own usually just by dividing in half. Hi, the next organism we're going to look at is viruses. Now, you've probably heard of the coronavirus, and it is in the category of round viruses, round like the sun, and so that's why it's corona, and it has spikes on the outside. But viruses come in various shapes, including these tall, thin ones, which to me kind of look like spaceships. They can come in flat ones or coily ones. The thing about a virus is they do not contain the organelles or the cell parts to reproduce on their own. So they must trick a cell in order to take it in, put the genetic material from the virus into the cell, and then the material from the virus will take over the cell and replicate new viruses. Quite often, as the viruses leave the cell, they have part of the cell on top of them, and that's why it's so tricky to kill viruses and even sometimes to detect them in the body. So viruses will, usually when you're treating a virus, you treat it with a drug that prevents it from getting into the cell. So those are viruses. Next group we're looking at are fungi, and usually when you think fungi, you think mushrooms, but this one's quite different. Fungi, the main fungi on the body that causes disease is yeasts, and yeasts will, small microorganisms that will produce in various environments on the body, but they usually want warm, moist, and dark, and they will replicate by budding. And this is the vaginal yeast infection. And again, warm, moist, and dark. And usually the bacteria on your body usually keep this yeast under control. But if the bacteria change for whatever reason, it may cause the yeast to change. Okay? There's also some other yeasts such as ringworm and athlete's foot. The last classification of pathogens we're going to look at are protozoa. And protozoans are usually very small organisms, and they're very unique, microscopic, and they usually have a way of moving using cilia, or amoebas are another one, and they have what are called false feet. They are free living, but they often will live in another host. Most of them are harmless, but some will cause diseases. This is Giardia, which is an intestinal one. You may have heard of beaver fever, and the result of this protozoan will cause diarrhea. There's also an amoeba, which you can get in bad water, which will give you amoebic dysentery. And another one is the protozoan that is transferred through mosquitoes that give malaria. And that's the end of the introduction to microorganisms. Feel free to fill out the note page for your information only. You do not need to send it to me.